Hey, what's up, everybody? It's me, Chris Herman, here for another episode of On Deck, being filmed, recorded, produced, edited, distributed, and all those things right here at the Herman Agency in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Today, going monologue, this is going to be episode 74. And today's topic is Joe Rogan. As it says on the card. Today's topic, Joe Rogan. Man, I got a lot to say about this topic. Any of you that have been paying attention to the news lately will see that Joe has found himself in some hot water. I would say some of that not deservedly so, and some of it deservedly so. And, you know, I want to address this topic because I think any of you that know me know that I'm a big Joe Rogan fan. I can't tell you how many episodes I've listened to. It's a lot. Listen to countless hours of his conversations. I've learned an incredible amount of information. I've been exposed to new ideas, people, thought processes of all walks of life, and I have always found, and still do, find his podcast to be a real source of informational and educational wealth. And so, what's happened recently, there's really been two things that have happened. The first started about, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, when Neil Young, the famous musician from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, a man I have always tremendously respected. I've always liked and appreciated Neil's music, his stance. The guy to me was a real walk it like you talk it, 60s counterculture revolution guy, a guy who was never afraid to speak out against the man and stand up for principles, which he's doing now. But this whole thing with Joe started with Neil saying, hey, he wanted his music pulled from Spotify if Joe was going to be on the platform as well, too. He did not want his music to be distributed by a platform that was supporting Joe, because Neil felt that Joe Rogan has been, distributing misinformation about vaccines and COVID. So that was the first thing that happened, and then Joni Mitchell followed suit, and to which Spotify said, okay, see you guys. And Joe issued what I thought was a very classy response, in which he said, hey, listen, I've always tried to have open forum conversations. I do the best that I can to prepare. I can do a better job always of having more diverse information. I respect and really like Neil Young and his music. I'm not mad at him. He's made a decision for himself, and but I stand by what I do. And I thought that was a really classy response. And as somebody who has listened to a lot of Joe Rogan episodes, and particularly the ones in question, which were with Dr. Robert Malone and James McCullough. Forgive me if I don't get those names exactly right, but they are both significantly esteemed medical doctors in their fields. I think James McCullough, if I'm getting his name right, is the most published doctor in his particular chosen field. I'm sorry, the other guy's name, I'm just forgetting it right now, but it was one of the inventors of the RNA vaccine technology. And so you have two people incredibly experienced in their fields, incredibly knowledgeable, sharing their insights on what they thought were some of the things that have gone wrong with the COVID response, missed opportunities that they felt that the government had in terms of being able to, in addition to supporting vaccines, also support different therapeutics. They spoke out against some of the sort of coordinated mass media dialogue about some of the treatments that have been successful for many people, but have been branded as horse dewormers. And you guys you're all up to speed here, but I listen to these conversations, and I think anybody with a brain on their head listens to these conversations and is able to choose, the information that they think is valuable, and sort out some things that maybe they don't totally agree with. I think sometimes Joe stands a little bit too firm in the, in the therapeutic side, and because that worked for him. I think clearly the vaccine has worked very well for thousands, if not millions of people. But that being said, there should be the ability to have an open dialogue in our country about other ways to handle the pandemic. Okay? Yes, have the vaccines been successful? It seems like overall they have been in reducing hospitalization and death, particularly amongst the most vulnerable. Have there also been other treatments along the way that have been helpful to people to prevent them from getting into the hospital? If you listen to these doctors and many others, the answer is yes. But there's not an open dialogue about this. So Joe Rogan's podcast is one of the only places where there's open conversation about this stuff. Now, a lot of these conversations go against the narrative, which is get your vaccine, get your vaccine, get your vaccine, get your vaccine. Okay? But why can't we have open and honest debate and intelligent conversations without that being labeled misinformation? Misinformation is a word that is being used way too much these days. And I just think that we are on a real slippery slope. And so, Neil Young pulls out, Joni Mitchell pulls out, Joe issues his apology, Spotify stands by him, and I'm, in my opinion, I'm like, all right, good. Neil took his stand, Joni took her stand, Joe took his, the world moves on. Unfortunately, as part of this whole narrative, there was a compilation, and no, let me rephrase that, not unfortunately, okay? There's nothing unfortunate about what has happened, but a compilation video from Joe's many podcasts over the years has surfaced in the last week, and in that video, it is a compilation video that is very unflattering to Joe, rightly so. And it is a compilation of different episodes in when he's having conversations and he uses the N-word in these conversations. But he does not refer to the N-word as the N-word. He says the actual full word, which I think we're all clear at this point in time. That's just not an acceptable word to say. Never has been, but certainly now is not. And there are two components to this video. One is, I think it can be said that, and I believe Joe in this, and this is where I think he was, where he handled it, because I think he did some things right, and I think he did some things not right here. So I'm going to elaborate on both. Again, this is just my opinion, but it's very easy these days to put together compilation videos and take people's words out of context. Joe says that in these video clips that were compiled together, he was having dialogue in which they were talking about this word, not saying the word derogatorily, but they were referencing other artists, other comedians, Red Fox, Richard Pryor, and they were referencing those conversations or talking about the word, and instead of saying the N-word in these conversations, he used the actual word. But when you slice it down and you just hear a bunch of him saying the N-word, the N-word, the N-word, the N-word, the N-word, of course, it sounds and looks terrible. And I think that he fairly and reasonably addressed that and said, hey, listen, this is it's a compilation video. It really puts a real bad look on me. I agree. It looks horrible. These words were taken out of context, but I should have never said the word. And I believe him in that. And I think that was a fair apology on him. He did say he was sorry. And I think that's fair. Where I don't think that he has really handled this as well as he could have, and I do feel, a little bit like, it's really not a good look, is in that compilation video, they reference a very old podcast where he's sitting with two other comedians and he's talking about going to see a movie, The Planet of the Apes. And he's talking about the story of how he went to see the movie in, a predominantly urban market and in a predominantly urban theater. And he uses language that is, it's absolutely inappropriate, and it is racist. I mean, in my opinion, what came out of his mouth is a very racist thing to say. I think it's just something dumb that flew out of his mouth. I don't find him to be a racist person. I've listened to thousands of hours of his conversation, not thousands, hundreds. Not once have I ever said, man, this guy's a little racist. But he said something at that time off the cuff. It came flying out of his mouth, and it was totally inappropriate. And when he brought that up in his second apology video, I don't think that he really did a good enough job of acknowledging that he really said that, and that what he said was racist and hurtful. I think he really needed to go further there. And so that's why I'm kind of torn on this situation. And the funny thing is this morning I watched Trevor Noah's response video to this apology. And I'm not really a big Trevor Noah fan. I liked Trevor Noah when as he was coming up, but now I feel that he's become very, kind of politicized in a particular direction. And so I'm not always down with his thing, but I listened to his response video this morning and I was like, he makes a good point here. That this particular phrase that Joe used, which I'm not even going to repeat right now, you can all do your own homework. Not good. It's just not good. People make mistakes. People say stupid things. Sometimes things fly out of people's mouths that they just shouldn't. Particularly, I guess, if you're a comedian and you're just constantly like throwing shit out of your mouth to see what's funny. Sometimes you make a mistake or you say the wrong thing. But if you do that, you got to really own up to it. And I don't think Joe fully owned up to that. Okay, the guy's under a massive amount of heat right now, and we live in a world where and I guess what I'm getting at is the bigger point here is the world that we're living in, and Joe is a symbol of what we're experiencing. But I don't think that it's just a happenstance that all this stuff happened in the last 2 weeks. I don't. I think there has clearly been an organized effort by somebody or some group to take Joe down. And why would they do that? Well, Joe's audience is typically 11 million people. CNN can't touch that. Tucker Carlson on Fox is 2 million an episode. I mean, Joe's audience and his reach quadruples the mainstream media's prime programs. And that's a real threat because the mainstream media, I think anybody that has half a brain in their head right now is going, this is not a news source. These are not news sources anymore. And they're clearly ideological in nature. They're to the left or they're to the right. Can you really trust what they're saying? But, Joe has a direct line to a large number of people in the world. And he has these open forum conversations where there's a lot of very good and useful information shared. Sure, there's some dumb shit said from time to time. You got to discount that. I mean, think of all the conversations that you have in your life. Is every one of them spot on, dead on accurate? Do you not say things that are dumb? Do you not at times believe something that seems, sensible at the time? Then you look back and go, boy, that was really dumb. He's the first to admit that. But the thing about his show is that it's an open forum and people of all mindsets are on that show. And that's what I really appreciate about it. And I think that's what we need more of in this world. We need more openness in communication. We need more trust and honesty in communication. And we need to listen to each other. And we need to understand we are not all going to agree on everything. It's just not going to happen. There's 8 billion people in the world. You think we're all just going to file in lockstep, all thinking the same thing? Absolutely not. Does that mean that you're not supposed to be, or you shouldn't be, or you shouldn't have a desire to be loving and understanding of all people and all different experiences? Yes, absolutely. We have to find the commonalities as human beings. But we also have to understand that as adults, we can have conversations, we can say things that not everybody's going to agree with, but it doesn't mean it's got to be the end of your life. And a perfect example of this, and I learned my lesson here, because a week ago or 2 weeks ago, Whoopi Goldberg said something really dumb on The View, referring to the fact that the Holocaust wasn't about race. I don't know what she exactly said, but she said something that was significantly insulting to the Jewish people. And, why did she say that? Because her growing up experience and life experience gave her a different view on the topic. And she expressed her feelings, and her feelings hurt a lot of people. And so what they do, they kicked her ass off the show for a period of time. And this is where I learned my lesson. Because when I saw that, I was like, I had a little chuckle, right? Because this whole cancel culture shit has gotten way out of hand. And it definitely feels like it's coming primarily from one direction. So I did have a little chuckle. But I don't remember who it was that I listened to or read on Twitter somewhere. And they were like, no, we're grown adults. Whoopi doesn't need to be taken off the air for what she said, nor does Joe. And I was like, they're right. Absolutely right. I had a little chuckle about it, and I felt bad about that because I thought, boy, that just showed a level of immaturity on my part, to allow myself to be sucked into this sort of the same thought process. And this thought process, or what we're seeing playing out right now with this, cancel culture, just fucking bullshit, is nobody can say anything, right? Everybody's afraid to talk. Nobody wants to say what they really think. God forbid you say the wrong thing. God forbid you don't agree 100% with this agenda or that agenda. God forbid you question authority and say, I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with the information that I'm receiving. God forbid you do any of that, right? And God forbid you put it on social media. I shared David Goggins, a post from David Goggins. Many of you know who David Goggins is. Tremendous human being. African-American man who grew up in an incredibly abusive household, suffered extreme racism as a child and as a young man, and still to this day. Ate and drank his way into 320 pounds, going nowhere in life, and he finally got his shit together, and he became a Navy SEAL. The guy's an absolute fucking rock solid inspiration. He's been on Joe Rogan's show. He's a friend of Joe's. He posted a post on Instagram in support of Joe, saying, hey, listen, a lot of people are giving me shit for being a friend of Joe's. I stand by Joe. Is Joe a racist? No. Was Joe stupid for saying the N-word? I almost said it. See, because I'm reading right off. It was written right on the damn post. I almost just said it and just reading it here, and I caught myself, so I'm glad I did. But I'm going to leave that in here, okay? Because I'm quoting from David Goggins' post. And I shared that. And Instagram flagged it and pulled it down, saying that it violated their terms for hate speech. I wasn't saying anything. I was just sharing something that somebody had already said. So this censorship and this environment that we live in it's out of control. Okay? It's out of control. We've gotten to a point in this country where nobody can say anything, and I'm not talking about saying something that is hurtful to other people. Okay? I'm just talking about having conversations where we as adults are able to express our ideas and our opinions and our feelings about topics. It's just gotten to the point where everybody that I know is afraid to say what they really think. They don't want to speak out. And I think that's a really dangerous place for us to be in. It's extremely dangerous. We've gotten to the point where at one point in time, this whole agenda, this whole march towards this started off in legitimately being compassionate or caring about other people's feelings, or people who maybe have had a different experience, or disenfranchised, or who have grown up in different races and colors that didn't have the same, perhaps if you would call it, Anglo experience, and for us to be understanding about that. There's nothing wrong with that. We should all work very hard to understand the challenges that people go through in this world of different races, different cultures, different socioeconomic backgrounds, okay? Yes, we need to have that compassion, and I think any one of us that would sit down together has that. There are some that don't, but that's because they haven't learned any better. They haven't been taught. They've been exposed to the wrong things growing up. Maybe they had hurt and pain in their life and then they just take it out on somebody else. But the point that I'm trying to make is what started off as a movement to be more caring and considerate to other people has turned into something that is absolutely out of control. People losing their livelihoods for saying one wrong thing. Or saying, and I'm not saying Joe said one wrong thing, but Whoopi Goldberg said one wrong thing. They pulled her off the air. Don't know when she's coming back. I mean, how many more of these do we need to see? And when does it stop? Who's next? Right? Who's next to say the wrong thing? They're gone. They're gone. Who's going to be left? When we rid the world of every person that said something at some point in time in their life that was the wrong thing, that maybe they made a mistake, maybe they said the wrong thing. And I'm not talking about people who are legitimately hateful. I'm talking about people who did something dumb at some point in their life and grew up and moved on. When we rid the world of everybody, who's going to be left? Who's going to be left? Why are we doing this to ourselves, and why are we allowing this? Joe made a mistake. He made mistakes. He said a word he shouldn't have said a million times. You heard me just now. I almost said it just in trying to quote somebody else's words, right? It almost flew out of my mouth by mistake. Again, I'm leaving it in here. But the point is, people make mistakes. People say the wrong thing from time to time. It doesn't mean they're inherently a horrible person. But this notion that we've just got to rid everybody, it's troubling. Now, again, I think Joe handled some of his response well, and I think he handled other parts of his response not so well. And quite frankly, I'd like to see him give this some little thought, have a little time to think about it and say, you know what? That particular comment that I made about going to the movie theater was a fucking horrible thing to say. I said it, and it was a racist thing to say. I don't know why it came out of my mouth. It just did in the moment. But it was wrong, and it was hurtful, and I'm deeply sorry for it. Okay. Let the world judge him or you or any of us on that. Because we all make mistakes. We all say the wrong things. But as adults, we've got to get to a point where we just let it go. Is an apology real? Can we apologize? Is anybody even capable of offering a real apology these days? Right? Or is everybody so defensive and fighting for their life and fighting for their positions, fighting for their jobs, fighting for their livelihoods, that God forbid they say the wrong thing? How do you even handle that? You got to go into constant PR mode, on every word that you say. And now we live in an environment where we don't have freedom of speech. We do not. One of the fundamental bedrocks of this country, of the greatest country in the history of the world. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of the press. It's fucking vanishing right before our eyes. And we're all afraid because we see this stuff happening. This one's getting taken down, that one's getting taken down. We all see this shit happening and everybody's too quiet, nobody wants to stand up. What's going to happen? I think I know what's going to happen. I'm going to address it in another episode. But it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good when our fundamental rights and freedoms of expression are slowly extinguished out of our own fear to speak up against what is clearly not right. We must learn to love, understand, forgive one another, and find common way forward. And I know Joe Rogan feels that way because I've listened to 100 of his episodes. It's at the freaking bedrock of almost everything he talks about. The guy supported Bernie Sanders. Still gonna rip him down. So, that's my thought on the topic, ladies and gentlemen. Not particularly a fun or uplifting episode. Don't know who will listen. Don't know who cares. But if you do, comment, send me a text, send me a direct message, do something, communicate with me, because I just feel like we're getting to this point where if we don't start sharing our meaningful thoughts about what's going on in the world, it's going to be too late.